Welcome back to my channel, Rebels and Revolutions. My name is Yulia, and I cannot thank you enough for all of your feedback and kind words I received after releasing my very first episode. With so much to talk about, let's just jump right into the second one. Most of the revolutions that I researched were led and inspired by small groups of instigators who were often represented by a charismatic leader, such as Fidel Castro, Vladimir Lenin, or Simón Bolívar. The subject of today's episode is very different. There are no real leaders and revolutionary heroes urging their supporters to rise to the occasion. In fact, in the next 2 episodes, we will be talking about one of the most fascinating uprisings in the 20th century, the Quiet Revolution of 1989 in the German Democratic Republic. Why did I choose this topic? Because this revolution brought down the Berlin Wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The Quiet Revolution of 1989 did not have a single revolutionary leader, but instead appears to be totally spontaneous, driven by masses of disaffected East Germans who wanted to live the Western, or more specifically, American dream of free market democracy, which turned out to be a bit of a myth, later invented by the victors of the Cold War. Well, I was lucky to never experience life under actually existing socialism, or any variation of it. My family came from behind the Iron Curtain, and their stories are slightly terrifying. That being said, the vast majority of people in the Soviet bloc countries demonstrating for change in the 1980s did not have a clear idea of what their country would look like after the changes occurred. They just knew that they wanted change. East Germans were in a more enviable position, as they could see the goal of their struggle: life on the other side of the Berlin Wall in West Germany. I believe that revolutions are not an expression of the will of the masses. They are simply a way to channel the anger, dissatisfaction, and frustration, and they are always heavily dependent on 3 rights: the right person, the right time, and the right place. This is the story of those right and wrong people and their impact on this revolution. This remarkable story contains 2 parts. It is almost impossible to tell the tale of the monumental significance of the Berlin Wall collapse without looking back to that ominous day, or ominous night, of August 13th, almost exactly 60 years ago. The leader of East Germany, Walter Ulbricht, assisted by his mini-me, Honecker, decided to do something that really had no historical precedent. They took a beautiful European capital and they built a wall. And this wall halted any movement of Berliners between the 2 parts of the city, tearing apart families, friends, and a great country. I guess the last 2 sentences answered my classic questions of where, Berlin, and when. August 1961. Well, this first part of the story does not have an official name. Its consequences have many names. Not all of them are appropriate. Above all, it involved the imprisonment of the citizens of the GDR. Why? Well, that is the million-dollar question. I have read several accounts of those justifying the wall as a necessity for the survival of the German Democratic Republic. And I think I understand this argument, since Berlin was on the borderline between the East and the West. And in this competition between the 2 systems, people voted with their feet in favor of the West. And rather than trying to compete, the leaders of the GDR decided to protect their power base. Thus, in the first part of this episode, we will travel back in time to 1961 and try to imagine ourselves as citizens of this beautiful city, waking up on the morning of the 13th of August to see their city divided into 2 parts. while American, French, and British protectors stood by in passivity. Let's go back to our main question. Why would anybody wish to divide this city by building a wall? To answer this one, we will need to travel back in time even further to 1945, the year when the terrible war had just ended. At that point, Germany was divided into 4 Allied occupation zones. Actually, it looked a bit like a pie. Inside of this pie was another and much smaller one, as Berlin, the capital of Germany, was likewise divided into occupation sectors, even though it was located deep within the Soviet piece of the German pie. In 1948, as the tensions between Western Allies and Soviet Union escalated, US, France, and Britain decided to unite their occupation zones and form one independent entity, which in 1949 became a sovereign country, the Federal Republic of Germany, or simply West Germany. The problem was that this new entity also included the part of Berlin which was previously controlled by the Western Allies, thus the name West Berlin, with no geographic connection between it and West Germany. Stalin was not very pleased with this development and decided to convert the Soviet zone of occupation into an independent state, which on October 7, 1949, became the German Democratic Republic, or GDR. Despite the nominal independence, GDR remained effectively a Soviet protectorate for years to come. Stalin also decided to blockade West Berlin, this little enclave of capitalism inside the Soviet zone of control, hoping to force the West, as well as the citizens of West Berlin, to abandon the city. And that is when the Great Berlin Airlift by British and American pilots, though several other countries participated in it as well, saved the city by supplying it with all necessities until May of 1949, when Stalin had to admit his miscalculation and abandon the blockade. By that point, many Germans realized that residing in the Soviet zone of occupation was becoming less and less appealing, while the Western zone, supported generously by funds doled out by the Marshall Plan, offered higher paying jobs, material comforts, and various freedoms not available in the East. The wage gap was particularly noticeable for the highly educated Germans. And since Berlin was effectively a gateway to the West, allowing almost unrestricted movement between the two worlds, the city became the epicenter of a mass migration westwards. Initially, Stalin supported the fair competition between the two Berlins in hope of proving the clear superiority of the Soviet model. But by the early mid-1950s, it became clear that Stalin's dreams did not come to fruition. Admittedly, by that point, Stalin did not care about this unfortunate turn of events, as he died in March of 1953. Stalin's successor, Nikita Khrushchev, cared deeply that he was actively losing the only side-by-side experiment of the East versus the West competition, with West Germany and West Berlin luring away the weak-minded, but highly educated and skilled citizens of the GDR. At the very beginning of my research of this topic, I thought the GDR was just a puppet of the almighty Soviet Union, who simply instructed them to build the wall. Then I understood that it was East Germany that relentlessly applied pressure on the Soviet leadership to protect East German citizens from the West, basically presenting Khrushchev with an ultimatum. Either East Germany folds, and with it the rest of the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe, or you help us do something about West Berlin. I was actually surprised how long it took East German leadership to finally bully Khrushchev into submission. If I were to be the East German dictator, I would have done it much sooner. So why did Khrushchev finally agree with the GDR Supreme Commander, Walter Ulbricht, and approved the construction of the wall, which divided a beautiful European city, a fascinating country, and two competing ideologies? Aside from the intensifying flight of East Germans, what I think changed his mind was the perceived weakness of the new US President John F. Kennedy, who met Khrushchev in Vienna, leaving an impression of an amateur politician, at least from Soviet perspective. His previous handling of the Bay of Pigs debacle did not help either.
This was a struggle of Cuban patriots against a Cuban dictator. While we could not be expected to hide our sympathies, we made it repeatedly clear that the armed forces of this country would not intervene in any way.
Here, the old Russian bear smelled blood, and felt that he could get away with much more than he would have if the good old Ike were still at the helm of US politics. While Kennedy clearly was not interested in going to war with the USSR over Berlin, he did send the hero of the Berlin Airlift, General Lucius Clay, to West Berlin to show the US commitment. Despite the PR efforts, the idea of the wall must have seemed like a blessing for the Allies, as a chance of an outright Berlin takeover by Soviet and East German forces declined considerably once the wall was built. East Germany, on the other hand, would be assured the survival of the state, while Soviet Union would maintain its Eastern European empire without needing to go to war with the West. At the time, it probably seemed like a win-win situation. Oh wait, not exactly a win-win all around. East Germans who were not able to get out lost their dignity and their freedom.
I must get out of here. I must get free.
If most of the players in this drama essentially wanted the wall, where was the revolution? My earlier statement was, of course, a simplification. Not everyone wished for a wall to appear in the middle of Berlin. Many thought that Khrushchev was bluffing, and the Soviets would not go to war over Berlin if the West retaliated against the construction of the wall. History proved them right. Khrushchev clearly instructed Soviet commanders on the ground to avoid engaging Allied forces if they were to strike against the newly constructed wall. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20. Many in the Federal Republic, including the legendary Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, believed that Western Germans could not and should not hide behind the wall, and clearly many in the East were openly hostile to the idea of the wall. Thus, the East German leadership had to orchestrate this dark revolution very carefully and quietly, building a wall literally overnight under the cover of darkness, striking decisively and acting in complete secrecy to avoid all suspicion. And they did it with perfect German precision. And thus, the first revolution, which is known in Germany as Barbed Wire Sunday, was the Herculean task of dividing a city into two separate parts, violating the original post-war agreements right in front of the Allied troops. Not to mention millions of already agitated East Germans who could have easily revolted against their government. Thus, the swift execution of this plan was key. The leader of the Soviet Revolution, V.E. Lenin, once famously stated, "Capitalists will blindly sell us the rope with which we will hang them." Otherwise, he was a kind and gentle fellow. Ulbricht turned out to be a great student of the Russian revolutionary genius, and did exactly that, buying an enormous quantity of barbed wire from Western firms all over the world to avoid suspicion. He assembled them in many construction sites throughout Berlin. He entrusted the delicate task of orchestrating this revolution to Erich Honecker, the future and last leader of the GDR. For Erich, it was an all-out gamble. If the operation codenamed Rose went without a hitch, he would become the heir apparent, the prince of the GDR. If it failed, he would be plowing snow in Siberia. And his revolutionary planning was exemplary. He mobilized police and armed forces without telling most of his commanders about the real purpose of the mission they were to undertake. He set the day for August 13th, 1961. In fact, I really wanted to release this episode just in time for the 60th anniversary of this historic event, but I got totally bogged down with the research and ended up releasing it 3 months later. C'est la vie. And so, in the very early hours of August 13, 1961, Honaker executed an unimaginable revolution. The troops swiftly formed the second ring of defense around the soon-to-be constructed border. In all, the entire front line of Operation Rose involved the use of 11,900 People's Police, 12,000 factory militia units, and 4,500 state security men. The streets along the new border were sealed with barbed wire, with such speed and efficiency that only a small number of nearby residents were awoken by this process. And by the time East Berliners realized what was happening, the mousetrap was nearly closed. The only thing that could stop the wall was the intervention of Western troops. But they were under orders to stand by and not intervene as long as the construction of the new wall took place entirely on the East German territory. To be fair to the Allied military commanders, Soviet forces under the command of Marshal Konev, yes, the same Konev who took Berlin in 1945, were greatly superior in number to the combined Allied troops, and in the case of a conventional attack, would steamroll over West Berlin. And Operation Rose became one of the greatest successes of the GDR leadership, while tearing apart an entire nation and a great city. While the Berlin Wall had many iterations and improvements, its immoral nature became obvious in the morning of August 14th, as it effectively imprisoned East German citizens. The wall did accomplish its immediate goal of stopping the brain drain from the GDR, leading to a considerable economic growth and extending the life of this artificially created country by another 28 years. Even more importantly, the wall significantly reduced the east to west tension, perhaps saving the world from another catastrophic war. And while the wall kept getting stronger, higher, and increasingly more impenetrable, the cracks of its foundation appeared the very night this insidious piece of architecture was born. These cracks were filled with tears of separated families, the blood of those who tried to escape, not willing to remain behind it, and the discontent of an increasing number of East Germans. Soon, the wall became an ideological embarrassment, showing the world the real face of the Soviet version of communist paradise. And here I must bring forward JFK's historic speech, delivered in June of 1963 in West Berlin, perhaps one of his most moving performances.
There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
At the time, it seemed that Berlin would remain divided forever. Yet, less than 30 years later, the wall was no longer. Its demise, however, did not begin in Germany, but Hungary of all places. But that is the topic for the second part of this episode on the Berlin Wall. Thank you so much for spending the last 20 minutes with me. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and join us next time. Take care!